So I've been asked to talk about specifically the work that I've done photographing the libraries at the university. And so here we go. So the series is called Illuminating Cambridge Libraries. This is the front cover of the book that is out now. And I realized at the end, I hadn't actually put my website address anywhere. So if you want, you can, I think the presentation will be available at a later stage and you can download it and save it, whatever you'd like. But what I wanted to do was to look at, really have some idea of a photographic contemplation of the University of Cambridge, the libraries within the University of Cambridge. Now, I've been in Cambridge only about 4 years, actually. Before we came, we were in Scotland. And this photograph, this is a view outside the front door of our house. And I'll tell you, we miss it. We do miss it, but we're still very happy to be in Cambridge. So when we were moving down here, I was thinking, what am I going to photograph in Cambridge? They don't have the rolling hills, and there is quite a bit of mist and fog along the river. I have to say it's very nice as well. But in some ways, it's hard to compete with these gorgeous Scottish landscapes. And when I was coming down, I was also, when we were in Scotland, I had just left academia, as Jane was saying. And I was trying to think of a way to, in some ways, honor my time in academia and my love for the dissemination of knowledge, which I still do have and will have till the end of my days, I'm sure. So I came up with the idea to photograph one library from each of the 31 colleges. It was also a way for me to get to know my new hometown a little bit better, I suppose. Quite a intense way to get to know them, but there it is. So I started putting together some very formal request letters to the librarians, and I received a first, sorry, I'm just trying to move okay. The Zoom photos were hiding over part of my slide. I couldn't actually see. So I put out a whole bunch of letters asking to photograph some of the libraries, and the first library that said yes, the first one I got to photograph, was the Wren Library at Trinity College. I don't know how many people are new or seasoned Cambridge folk here, but the Wren Library is built in 1695, I think it was finished. And it is indeed normally in non-pandemic times open to the public, so you can go in and see. It's limited hours. It used to be something like 12 till 2. I think Monday to Friday, maybe now on the weekends as well. But at any rate, I remember being completely wowed and almost in some sense overwhelmed. And at the end of each day, when I would photograph, I would go home skipping with my big camera bag on my back. And it's quite a sight to see someone with a really big backpack skipping down the way along Midsummer Common. I was just really excited and so happy to be able to do this. So I wanted to start with this one just because it was the first as well that I photographed. But this is what I call, this sort of shot, I call this the grand view shot. And while I took a grand view shot at each library, because I think it helps to understand and put things in context, what I'm really interested in actually in photographing are the tiny details of the library and the things that make the building into the building itself, honoring what the building structure itself, and in terms of how does that facilitate the dissemination of knowledge. So here, this is a close-up looking at the ceiling bosses on the roof. So on the ceiling, you can see them over here. There are quite a few. I think there are 20 some on the ceiling. I can't remember exactly, but this is looking at a ceiling boss. And also you can see there's some age, there's some nice geometry to it. There's really gorgeous architectural detail and scalloping, and they've also very cleverly hidden a smoke detector. And there are quite a few smoke detectors hidden along, but it's not something that you would ever really notice as you're walking through the Wren Library because you're so overwhelmed with everything else. And that's kind of the point of what I like to do with my photography, is to pull out those smaller details that you might not ordinarily notice or might pass your eye. Pass as you go past. So looking at the shelving details or some of the decorative features. This is a bust of Sir Francis Bacon. And of course, I wanted to also capture book spines and shelving details themselves. So looking at how books are shelved, in what way, and also the deterioration and preservation and sometimes restoration of the books and the spines themselves. It's all very, I feel like it's all very poignant and very, in some ways brings the library into more of an emotional state. So trying to look at the beautification of knowledge, if you can, in some way. So as I finished at the Wren, I was asked, I asked each librarian if they could recommend another library that I go to, because I'm so new in town, I didn't really know who to ask next. And so they would just, one by one, I slowly started to march through the libraries. And I got a little bit of movement with it. It was really quite well received, actually. People seemed rather interested in what I was doing, and were happy to be a part of this Illuminating Cambridge Libraries series. So within about 9 months, I had 10 libraries. Many of them were the old libraries, and I was really interested in that because I had thought the modern libraries would be, in some sense, maybe easier to get into, that the older libraries would be more protected. But it turns out that the modern libraries are the working libraries, and they're so busy that they weren't as interested at first, because they're so busy all the time. They had to squeeze me in because I'm not photographing people. I don't include people at all. So for me to move around when there aren't any people there is really hard for a working, busy library. So the older libraries is easier because they, you know, many of them don't have people in. This photograph here is from St. John's Old Library. So I had a small exhibition at Michael House, which, if you're new in town, it's an old church that's near the center of town. It's just a few doors down from Great St. Mary's by the marketplace. And it's been converted into a bit of a cafe as well. So, and they have art exhibitions. Usually they rotate. So they do rotate, sorry. So I had a small exhibition at Michael House a few years ago. And then within 2 years after I started, I had a much larger exhibition at the Hyung Gallery, which is part of Downing College, sort of a little bit down St. Andrew Street, halfway to the train station, maybe, not quite halfway. And that was a much larger exhibition, so it included 26 libraries. And then I finally got the full set. Oh, so I should say the Hyung exhibition, I still have photos available on the website from the exhibition if you'd like to see how it was set up. It was quite fun for me, the exhibition itself. So after 3 years, basically 3 years, I got the full collection of all 31 colleges. And these are the collection of the grand view shots in kind of postage stamp size. And it's quite something, quite a collection. Each library I photographed roughly 50 images, because I was looking at the details and the book spines and the ceiling details and the grand view from this angle and from that angle. And so it amassed to this enormous sum of images of about 1,800 photographs, which is really quite a lot. I decided the best way to deal with this and to kind of bring it down to something slightly more sizable was to make a book. And it had always been in the back of my mind to do that. And so there's the one monograph that I'll talk about in a little bit. I have it here. It's quite large. It's rather large. And it contains 490 of the photos. A lot of the librarians keep it out on their desk or their entry corridor, and they can play kind of spot the library, kind of a where's Wally sort of game. I think a lot of people have fun with it. I also do fine art prints and exhibitions and things. So I'll talk a little more about the series and then about the book, and then we'll see how it goes. So just some details for those of you who are interested in equipment. I have a fancy Nikon that I quite like, and some lenses made by companies Tamron and Sigma. And when I'm shooting, I always use my tripod, and I have a little cable, a shutter release cable, because I take such long exposures in these dark rooms. Sometimes it's 30-second exposure. And so I just have to wait. If I push on the camera itself, of course, it shakes the camera. So I use the cable. And manual mode, and I use grid lines to help me set up and make sure everything is straight, all these things. But the biggest thing that I had to do, and in some ways the most detailed, was waiting. I was waiting. I waited for 3 years. I was waiting for permission a lot of the times. I was waiting for people to stop walking past and shaking my tripod as they went. Sometimes somebody would walk down all the way in the other end of the room and it would shake my tripod. And so there was a lot of waiting there. And for permission, sometimes, you know, each of the 31 colleges are completely separate entities, and they each deal with permissions requests of this nature in a very different way. Some of them said yes immediately within 5 minutes. Oh, we've been waiting for your email, so excited that it's our turn. Some of them invited me on Twitter saying, hey, when is it going to be our turn? And some of them said, oh, it sounds very interesting. We have to bring the request to our governing body meeting. I'm sorry, they're not waiting for 3 months. So they're not going to meet for 3 months. So you have to wait for 3 months time. I said, oh, okay, fine. So I can wait. And then, and several of those I had to wait for the governing body. And then one in particular, the governing body, they didn't have time to get to my request during that meeting. So I had to wait to the second one, another 3 months later. So one in particular, I had to wait 6 months for permission, but they all came through and it's fine. I like to think I'm a patient person, and I usually am. So yeah, all right. So moving on, I also, as a result, so this is a photograph from King's College Library. And one of the things that came out of the series was just, of course, a natural curiosity of the libraries themselves and the architectural history. And actually a few other series as well came out of this library series. So here at King's College, we're standing in the library looking at the chapel out the back, you can see. And as I was photographing the library, you know, okay, well, the library at King's College is Victorian age. So I think it's 1878, I'm forgetting exactly, but roughly Victorian age. And so, but the college itself was built in 1448. So I asked the natural question of where was the library before this one was built specifically to be the library? And the answer was, it was in the old library and in the side rooms of King's College Chapel. And I was allowed to go in to the side rooms and the vestries, which is shown right here, to photograph. These bookcases in particular are still remaining from when the library was in these side rooms. They're still obviously actively used. And I just love the current modern day usage of these bookshelves that are date from the early 1600s. And one of the other things that came out of it was this, I call it an ear-shaped flange. I don't know, nobody else has come up with a better name, or a more accurate name, I should say. This used to be on these bookshelves in the room over here, back in the side rooms, in the vestries. And when they were decommissioning the library in the side rooms of the chapel, they hired a carpenter to reuse and repurpose these decorative flanges as they're the sides for the seats for the choir. In King's Chapel. So I was allowed to go into the chapel and photograph these in situ, which I was thrilled about. And that then led to a completely separate series. I was invited by the dean to photograph within the chapel. And so I also spent the last 2 years photographing details similar to the library series, but only for King's Chapel itself. And that's come out as a new book as well, just recently, actually a month ago. So you can see that on my website. But here we're just talking about more about the library series, so I'm going to move on. But that was a really fun little offshoot that's obviously been quite important for me. So another thing about the library series is thinking about some of the geometries and photographing what angles I wanted to photograph at and what subjects I was going to photograph. And most of the time, I was just left to my own devices. I could do whatever I want and go most places, but I always asked each librarian whether there was anything that they would like me to photograph that might be of use to them for outreach purposes, or something they hadn't had a photograph of before, and also whether there was something they didn't want me to photograph, specifically don't photograph this. And many librarians had answers for both, which is fine, and I always tried to honor that. The librarian at Pembroke College said, can you please photograph some of the stained glass windows? I said, yes, of course, sure, please, will you show them to me? And she brought me into this stairwell and pointed to this one here. And I thought, what? You've got to be kidding me. How am I going to photograph that? Of course, I can photograph that for you. And what it ended up with was one of my favorite photographic combinations, where you see the step down here in the bottom right corner. My tripod was laying down on that step, and I was laying down on top of my tripod to weight it down. And the camera was sticking out in midair over here, dangling over the stairs, so that I could then photograph this window at the proper angle. And it worked. I was thrilled. I'm really thrilled with both of the photos. I quite like both of them. I think they make a nice little set next to each other. But they hadn't yet had a photograph of their lovely stained glass window there. So I like to remember this little geometry that I had there. So that's one little story. And another little story is with this photograph here. This is the old library at Jesus College. And this is one of the ones that I think of when I'm thinking of what an old library might look like. This is kind of what comes to my mind. I think of this, just even before I saw what it looked like, I would think of something that looked quite like this. And the fun thing for me about this library is it's really, it has not been changed very much at all since it was built in, I think 1602, I think 1600 something. And you can see there's a tiny cable here on the floor, and that's when they want to plug in a column heater if someone's going to be working there for a while. It's really cold. I had to wear my winter jacket and my hat and my glove. I was freezing when I was in there. I'm normally cold anyway, but I was really cold in there. So I really remember that quite well. But also the other thing that makes this image interesting is it's the only one that I've actually edited for content. And what I did is I desaturated the fire hydrant. I didn't want to remove it because I felt like that would have been a bit dishonest to the time period that it was taken, but also it was kind of a glaring red and really dominated the picture and really stood out because you see there are not many other colors. So so it's the only one that I've actually edited, but I quite like the photo as well. I don't mind that I edited. Right, so as we move on, as I was saying, so there's 1,800 photos. I was trying to put together a book, and as I was trying to put together this book, obviously I had a really big effort to, in some sense, cull the images, because you just can't have a book with 1,800 images. Nobody wants to look at that. Even 490, it's a bit overwhelming, I think. Hopefully you think I've done it nicely. But as I was putting it together, the natural idea was to group the images by library and by college alphabetically. You know, we have Christ College, Churchill College, Clare College, Clare Hall. What comes next? I actually have my list in front of me here. Corpus, you know, anyway. And as I started to put it together, I realized that's not at all what I wanted to do. And the reason why is because at every library, I had tried to photograph very similar things. I wanted the shelving details. I wanted interesting features in the room like light switches. I wanted book spines, and all these things together told a story of the University of Cambridge College libraries in themselves. And so instead I organized the books so that it's basically a walk through a library, any library. And you can see, so you walk in and do this, and to help the reader kind of understand that it's a walkthrough, I wrote a tiny little poem, not necessarily a poet myself, but a tiny little poem to go through it, and I'll read it so you don't have to listen and read at the same time, of course, but just to help the reader go through the book. So we step into the library and browse the books, encased in details, let your mind unfurl in a special nook. Seek the right aisle, then find the right book, read under shelter, till outside beckons you with that look. So it's kind of just a bit of a walk through a library. So this is the chapter opening for Stairs, the first chapter. And so I have a tiny paragraph talking about what I think stairs are and can be, and what can they mean. You know, they actually have quite an adventurous aspect, because most of the time you can't see where you're actually going to get to. And we don't think about that because it's just climbing stairs. It's quite normal for us, isn't it? So anyway, and most of these images then have been sorted by geometry or by color or by light. And so these obviously have been sorted by geometry. There's some spiral staircases. And so we have St. Edmunds in the top left, and Fitzwilliam in the top right, and Downing in the bottom left, and Sydney Sussex in the bottom right. And the one I particularly like, Sydney Sussex, you can see the blue in the, so you're looking up at the spiral staircase, sorry, over here. And the ceiling has the wood paneling, but the ceiling also has a mirror on it. And the mirror is reflecting the blue carpet on the stairs that you're walking up. So I quite enjoyed I quite enjoy that one. A lot of people ask me if that's taken on a boat, actually. It looks very nautical, I suppose. It's quite the right color blue. Right, so this is from the textures chapter, looking at textures, and all these vertical, so mostly vertical stripes were really jumping out at me as I was searching through and looking at just how they're utilized. There's a few radiators, and there's a pot plant and some corbels and things like that, door hinges, and just trying to really pull through these textures and colors as they come through. Spaces, of course, there are so many spaces and vistas to look through. So we have Darwin on the top left and King's on the top right. Emma is on the bottom left in their new extension, and Girton College on the bottom right. It's transitioning between the old and the new, that one. So I'm quite a fan of this page, actually. I like the pastel colors and how they all kind of worked very nicely together. And here's a sample from the spines, the page of spines. So really, I was really looking for that texture, and especially with the one on the left from Peterhouse, is looking at the restoration and also where it was chosen to do the little bit of restoration there. And then I know some, they have the labels, and some of the libraries even soak the labels and try to age them a little bit before they put them on, because otherwise the bright white really stands out. So there are all these little tips and tricks that they have, the various libraries. And the end is looking out the windows, and what do we see? The idea being, when you're sitting in a library, most of us, we change our focus for a moment, and I do all the time. Change your focus for a moment. You look up and out the window. My window's over here at the moment, so I'm looking there. And if we need that momentary lapse, that change of our sight, in order to refocus our concentration and to get back to it. So sometimes it does indeed pull us away. It's a bit tantalizing, and sometimes it helps us to actually refocus. But in either case, the windows are rather important. And here's a few, many internal windows, just to show as well. They're not always externally looking. So what's next? So this is kind of the end. So I wanted to say, if you are still interested in reading more and seeing the book, I've given a £4 discount. If you want, feel free to go ahead and buy the book. So use the voucher code 4 for NVS. But so what's next? I do have a current exhibition up at the moment. It's been closed for the pandemic, but it will reopen for a few weeks whenever cafes reopen again. So it's at Michael House Cafe, again, near the center of town, in the center of town, really, just a few doors down from Great St. Mary's. And I assume, I don't know when it's going to open. Nobody knows, I suppose. I do have some works permanently displayed at the CUP bookshop, the Cambridge University Press bookshop, which is also right downtown near the market, and at Indigo Cafe, which is another great little independent cafe in town, also near the market on the other side of the market. So you can see some of my prints there and some of the work. And I really would like to have a large exhibition celebrating the end of this series. I had hoped to do it last year in concert with a book launch, but obviously that didn't work out. So hopefully it will happen at some point, maybe in the next year or two, and we'll let you know, keep you updated. So a lot of people ask me, what's next? What am I going to photograph next? People want a series on the chapels, or people want a series on Oxford libraries or something like that. And while I do indeed love historic architecture and buildings, and I will continue that, I also am going to do a little fine art series for botanical details next. So I have a nice little macro lens that I like, and I go around trying to find different stages of life in flowers, I suppose, botanical details. So so that's what's next in the immediate term, but I'm sure there'll be more historical photography later as well. Thank you very much. That's all I have for today, and happy to answer any questions that people have.